All right, so hello and welcome everybody to this very special edition of our GIS Express webinars. You're all very welcome here today. We're going to talk about switching to ArcGIS Pro. Now, I originally, tagged this as ArcMap, the unofficial funeral, right? If Esri Inc. aren't going to do it, we'll try and do something for them. But all joking aside, this webinar is going to be around, getting to grips with ArcGIS Pro. If it's something that you've put off in your back pocket and said, now's not really the right time, or hey, I've tried to switch to ArcGIS Pro, but it's just so confusing. There's so many ribbons, I want my old ArcMap back. All my tools were in the right place. And even if your software provider is telling you that, ArcGIS Pro has reached feature parity, all your features, all your analysis tools are available in Pro, you distrust it just a little bit. So we're going to get into all of it. If there's any questions, put them in the chat. There's a Q&A there as well. We'll get to them as we go through. But this is really, this webinar today is styled after the kind of training courses that I do for a lot of organizations, in the sense that we have a few slides introduced to the context, but I am going to show you ArcGIS Pro in real life, so to speak, and how you can get to grips with it. This webinar is being recorded. It will be made available on YouTube and LinkedIn later on. Cue everybody just leaving frantically now, but let's get into it. Switching to ArcGIS Pro today, the express workflows that you need to be aware of. Just before we start, I do want to say thanks. It is Friday afternoon. You could be doing so many other things with your time. So thanks. Hopefully you find this helpful. I will try and make this as practical and as interactive as possible. I really kind of, as with all my training courses that I do, both free and paid, I do try and make it as copy and paste to your actual day-to-day jobs as possible. Shameless sales pitch out of the way in the next 10 seconds. I do offer consultancy. I do offer custom training. You can find out more on my website, gis-express.com, if you want to find out more. Got a lot of cool things coming in the new year as well. Numerous workshops, numerous masterclasses, numerous training courses, and of course, I do consultancy as well. Just that's the sales pitch out of the way. But like I said, just reinforce this. Feel free to ask questions as we go throughout this session. Now, one question you might have is, who am I? I've seen, a webinar link online somewhere, of switching to ArcGIS Pro. Hey, that's what I need to do. But you might not know who I am. Just to give you a little bit of background, I suppose, my name is Adam Corbin. I have nearly a decade of experience solely in ArcGIS technology. I'm the only GIS consultant in Ireland and parts of the UK that solely focuses on ArcGIS, right? The ArcGIS is what I do for a living, both training and consultancy. I started off my GIS career in a crowd called Jacobs. Now that's Jacobs Engineering, not Jacobs the Biscuit Factory, which you might be familiar with. If you're based in Ireland, we have a biscuit factory called Jacobs Engineering, the global engineering firm. I have worked with Esri Ireland, your local software provider for ArcGIS on the island of Ireland. Nowadays, I am a one-person business running a thing called GIS Express. And over that kind of nearly a decade of experience, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of organizations, both in the UK and Ireland and parts of America as well. But I suppose the reason for the logos is just to, okay, this is who I've worked with in the past. But, the reason for the logos is not to say, hey, look at all the companies I've worked with. It's to tell you about the kind of wide array of use cases in ArcGIS. There's people on this webinar who are involved in public sector, private sector, telecommunications, transport, environment, ecology, civil engineering, right? And it makes up this thing of GIS. So no matter what your use case is, hopefully we can provide some value today. That's the fluff out of the way. Today's objectives really are threefold. First, I'm going to give you a 32-bit overview of ArcGIS Pro. 32-bit, if you're au fait with ArcGIS Pro's predecessor, ArcMap. It is 32-bit. ArcGIS Pro is amazingly 64-bit. We're going to give you an overview of ArcGIS Pro if you're coming from the background of ArcMap or ArcGIS Desktop. We're going to add data to our maps. Notice the plural, the beautiful plural there. We're going to add data to our maps in ArcGIS Pro, and we're going to create layouts, plural layouts. Beautiful thing. We're no longer restricted to, a single MXD file that has one map, one layout. We got it all coming in ArcGIS Pro. But I suppose where we start off with, at a very basic level, well, what is ArcGIS, right? Just to recap on this, it's sold by a crowd called Esri. It's ultimately created and developed by Esri. And it focuses on ArcGIS Online. Now, there's three main components to ArcGIS. There's ArcGIS Online, right? Or ArcGIS Enterprise if you're deploying it, right, on your server. That's fine, right? But just very basic licensing. We have ArcGIS Online. We have ArcGIS Pro, and we have ArcGIS mobile apps. Really, when we're talking about ArcGIS, the core of it is ArcGIS Online. And that is something that we need to be aware of when we're switching to ArcGIS Pro. There's a very heavy ArcGIS Online component. ArcGIS Online, of course, for those of you unfamiliar, is Esri's software as a service, cloud-based, works the same way social media does. You get a username, password, log in. All your organization's geographic information is there. You can access it via web maps, web applications, whatever it is. But it is also where you configure your mobile application workflows and also where you go to sort out your licensing for ArcGIS Pro. There are other ways to license ArcGIS Pro, but this is the main way. It's via an ArcGIS Online license. Now, ArcGIS Pro itself, just to give a little bit of context for those of you who might be coming from, ArcMap or Fresh, you've seen this webinar and you said, hey, look, ArcGIS Pro, that's what my organization has. I want to see what it's about. Well, ArcGIS Pro, it's a desktop GIS application, right? So it works the same way Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Outlook, Adobe Acrobat works, right? It's on your PC, it's on your laptop. And it is part of Esri's ArcGIS, right? Now, key thing about ArcGIS Pro is that it supports two-dimensional data. It also supports three-dimensional data, right? And it has, what Esri would call advanced capabilities for visualization, spatial analysis, data management, right? And in terms of where it sits within the ArcGIS licensing sphere, we do have our viewers, they're ArcGIS Online only. We have our editors, we have our field workers. We're, editors, we're setting up to edit information in web applications or web maps in ArcGIS Online. We're using field worker to do the exact same thing editors do, only in the mobile app. Then we have a creator, which is, the keys to the kingdom in terms of ArcGIS Online, can do everything in ArcGIS Online. But finally, we have what we're focusing on today, which is a GIS professional license. And it comes in three levels: basic, standard, or advanced. And that is the people who have access to everything in ArcGIS Online, everything a creator can do, a GIS professional can do, plus they have access to this thing called ArcGIS Pro. We won't spend too much time on credits. But it is one of those elephants in the room, when we roll out ArcGIS Online, because there's such a heavy connection now between ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Online. Credits are the currency that's used in ArcGIS Online, right? And you'll only two main things you'll be charged credits for: specific analysis tools within ArcGIS Online, namely the map viewer, and then storage of data as well. Now, because that connection exists within ArcGIS Pro, we just need to be careful that any analysis tools we're doing, they can consume credits in ArcGIS Online. It's a bit of an elephant in the room, bit of a limitation of ArcGIS Pro, if you ask me, but just to be aware of it. Now, a few considerations if you are coming from the realm of ArcMap or you're fresh to ArcGIS Pro, just a few considerations before we dive into it. Number one, everything is set up via projects, and I mentioned it's a very heavy AGOL view, but this idea is that we have a project within ArcGIS Pro. I'm pretty sure when they started this idea, hey, what are we going to call our new desktop application? Let's call it ArcMap, ArcGIS Desktop. Let's call it ArcGIS Pro. Pro, they probably thought like, GIS Professional, right? ArcGIS Professional license. But it is very project heavy. So you can think of Pro as being a project, right? You have GIS projects, you have all your file geodatabases, all your folder connections, all your maps, your layouts, your styles, your geoprocessing toolboxes that are now called analysis tools that we'll get into, but it's all set up via this thing called projects, okay? And, I like to think of it as, ArcGIS Pro, it just stands for projects. Whatever you want to take from it. You can think of it as professional. You can think of it as projects. Whatever makes you happy. Yeah. Another consideration is that contrary to popular belief, like, ArcGIS Pro offers 3 types of licensing. Same thing they had with ArcMap, basic, standard, and advanced licensing. A basic GIS professional, a basic ArcGIS Pro license covers about 80% of the ArcGIS Pro use cases. Yes, there are cases, very niche workflows where you might want to create and maintain your own relationships. You might have numerous related tables that you're creating. You can only do that in a standard license. There might be cartography tools that you want to get access to. It's only available on an advanced license, but for the most part, a basic ArcGIS Pro license covers 80% of your use cases. And you can always upgrade and Esri Pro rate it. Yeah. One key thing is hardware requirements. Okay, so ArcGIS Pro is redesigned to take advantage of this kind of modern multi-threaded process, right? Or processors that we see, in Adobe Photoshop, in Microsoft Excel. And you just need to be aware that, if you are coming from ArcMap, great, right? But maybe your laptop isn't suitable for ArcGIS Pro. It is a bit of a, mammoth, right? Like in terms of what the storage is. I mean, ArcMap used to be around 1.4, 1.5 gigabytes max, depending on what licenses you added on to it. ArcGIS Pro, I believe, was downloaded the other week fresh, and it was like 2.4 gigs. Yeah, but depending on your licenses and stuff like that, even just the size to download ArcGIS Pro requires a bit of a maybe hardware upgrade. Okay, now that's one thing to be aware of, but I suppose the performance is the big thing when we are moving ultimately to ArcGIS Pro. I mentioned I started my career off nearly a decade ago in Jacobs Engineering, where I was a graduate GIS analyst first. And I used to have to go into these MXD files, change a base map, and print it, right? So they had various MXD files set up like A3 landscape, A3 portrait, A4 landscape, A4 portrait, etc. And I used to have to go in, zoom to an area, just to the area, right, in the layout, and then hit export to PDF. And even that changing of the base map took ages, right? I used to have to open my MXD file, which would take a bit, right, by the way. Once that's open, then change the base map, go grab a cup of tea, grab coffee, whatever it is. I'd come back, the thing still probably didn't load up. I'd have to come back to it, right? And then change it again. And if you're in the area, right, if you're in the incorrect area, only after realizing when it fully renders, you have to go back in, change it again. That is a non-issue in ArcGIS Pro. You'll see now when we get into like the practical aspect of this session that really that has come on leaps and bounds, like base map changes near instantaneous, right? So ArcGIS Pro offers a ton more improved performance for both rendering and spatial analysis, right? And it can significantly affect your productivity as a GIS person, So, okay, yeah, we got that little conversation between hardware requirements, I mean, they say the ideal of RAM is like 64, 64 gigs of RAM, right? That's the ideal. The optimal is 32 gigs of RAM. You might have to have a conversation with your IT team about hardware requirements, but you know, the benefit of that is that the performance is a lot quicker. Now, learning curve and training. We're going to cover the express workflows to try and get you up to speed with ArcGIS Pro, what it is, where the most important tools are, where to click. But, you know, there is a learning curve associated with it. Mostly because Esri have tried within this kind of creation and maintenance of ArcGIS Pro to provide a kind of super sleek, modern looking interface. And, you know, if you didn't know Esri were behind ArcGIS Pro, you'd think it was a Microsoft product. And the reason for that is because it's like, okay, I appreciate Esri have a major partnership with Microsoft and they provide various points of integration between the two, but the actual interface of it completely different to ArcMap if you are coming from that. So there are, you know, consideration around learning curve and training as well. But if you didn't know, it was like, oh, this is a Microsoft Excel sheet, right? Because of the kind of heavy Microsoft modern, quote unquote, modern interface that they're trying to pull off in Pro. The other thing to note is we keep on talking about ArcMap, and you know, if you're experienced with that, you're probably going to tell me, "Hey, Adam, ArcMap is not just, you know, that's not what it is. It was ArcGIS Desktop, you know, and ArcGIS Desktop had, you know, ArcScene, right? It had ArcCatalog, it had ArcMap, right? And that's worth noting, right? That when you did install ArcGIS Desktop, you got all these different software products, as opposed to just the one that we're dealing with now is ArcPro. Yeah. And it's a worthwhile point, right? That we have, you know, ArcScene somewhere in the background, never fully loaded up for me when I was using it. So I never got a fully functioning 3D scene out of ArcGIS Desktop. But worth noting, 3D and spatial analysis enhancements are a thing. That is the major kind of selling point. Okay, general performance, probably way better in ArcGIS Pro, but the 3D and spatial analysis enhancements are pretty slick as well. As with any kind of sessions that I do, whether training sessions, workshops, whatever, I do like to include a slide just on GIS mumbo jumbo, because I do feel like a lot of GIS particular, right, project teams and people, there's this kind of technical jargon that exists solely within GIS. And that's across, right, software products such as QGIS, MapInfo have their own kind of terms. But in terms of ArcGIS, it takes on like another level, right, where you get these people who are really kind of glued in, dialed in to ArcGIS, and they could be speaking a separate language for all you know, right, that you're not au fait with. So I like to include this slide just on any sessions that I do, just on GIS mumbo jumbo, and it's specific to whatever the topic is. So today we're talking about ArcGIS Pro. Here is the GIS mumbo jumbo that if you're working with GIS people, you might come across, or if you're coming across like content online, training content, stuff like that, or help documentation as well on Esri, and you're like, what is that term? Let's go through it. So first thing, for those of you who don't know, AGOL is ArcGIS Online. It is the most commonly used GIS mumbo jumbo, I want to say. So we do have that to contend with. So ArcGIS Online, AGOL. Fun fact, Esri Inc. didn't actually like people using AGOL when ArcGIS Online got launched, but they've quickly learned to just accept it because that's what the end users agree is the consensus for AGOL. A little side note there as well, just while we're on the topic of rabbit holes, right? I remember one time I was in a meeting with various project managers, and one guy was talking about Esri Online, the other guy was talking about AGOL, and they were both saying, my system's better than your system, I think, you know, and purporting the benefits of both, right? And saying, no, I think we really need to consider Esri Online over this AGOL thing that you have. Turns out they're talking about the exact same thing. That's why I include GIS mumbo jumbo slides. So AGOL, ArcGIS Online, just as a tidbit. Projects then is what we're going to be dealing with. So get away from these MXD files or anything like that. We're talking about projects in ArcGIS Pro. That is what we're dealing with. And each project is, can contain various maps, various layouts, all your folder connections, all your file geodatabases related to that project. So no longer do you have to have a folder within File Explorer to say Project A and then have everything related to that in that folder. We're switching to projects and everything's housed within that particular project. Default is a term that you're going to get used to a lot as you embark in your ArcGIS Pro journey, right? Or adventure, whatever you want to call it. But the default, there's a lot of things set up for you by default. There's a default toolbox. There's a default layer style. There's a default file geodatabase when we create projects. So it's worth noting that each one of these projects on the right-hand side comes with its own set of quote unquote default items, right? And they could be file geodatabases, they could be default layout, default map, stuff like that. Yeah, so we just need to be aware of it. Geodatabases and feature classes. Geodatabases, of course, being the actual folder structure, the actual folder type. Feature classes can be points, lines, polygon, feature classes. But this is really kind of like taken on to another level where we have shape files before. So we, if you're like me coming from an ArcMap background, we're used to dealing with shape files, bringing it in, and I know there's like 5 items associated with, a shape file, give or take. There is really a kind of, specific focus on file geodatabases within ArcGIS Pro. Okay, so just to be aware of it, that seems to be like the currency, albeit that shapefile is the kind of, standard, accepted, most widely used GIS data type, I want to say. But geodatabases and feature classes just offer, they're more performant. There's no risk of kind of losing things if you don't attach like the PRJ file to an email, if you don't zip up the folder correctly. Cool enough, we can still use the geodatabase that it is just housed in the one side, but it's very heavy focus. The default geodatabase is the first thing you're going to see when you create a fresh project in ArcGIS Pro. But just bear in mind, it just seems to be targeted focus towards geodatabases now. Can, of course, still accept shapefiles, still accept KMLs, DWGs, but there seems to be a specific emphasis on feature classes. Ribbons and tabs, as I mentioned, if you didn't know as we were creating this thing called ArcGIS Pro, you'd nearly think it was a software provided by Microsoft. Yeah, and the reason for that is because there's various ribbons, there's various tabs, right? It is very Microsoft Office-y, right? Where we have a ribbon up the top, which replaces the traditional toolbars and menus in ArcMap, and then this ribbon up the top is a kind of context sensitive and changes based on whatever active tool you've selected or active layer, right? It does provide a more streamlined workflow, but it can be unsettling when you first click on and say, oh, wait, what do I have highlighted in my table of contents? Quick, I need to go back, right? And we just need to be aware, ribbons and tabs, they're the Microsoft kind of look and feel, yeah? And very stark difference between that and ArcMap. Layouts, of course, we all know what they are. When you go to print a high resolution PDF map, you have options for layouts. We also have tasks, which are pretty slick functionality within ArcGIS Pro, that it guides your end user, right, through a series of steps and actions. So they could be like geoprocessing tools. They're now called analysis tools. They could be setting up a map series formerly called data-driven pages within ArcMap. And it's particularly useful for standardizing processes, right? And helping new users learn workflows. If you recall, if you're using ArcMap, sometimes you get locked out. If somebody's in like the same MXD, if you have an MXD file hosted on your organization servers, when somebody else is on it, it'll create a lock file in the background. Very difficult for people to be signed in to the same file, right? Not necessarily in ArcGIS Pro. You could have an ArcGIS Pro project set up on your organization servers. Everybody's feeding into it. Everybody's editing data into it. And then, you know, you have tasks set up saying, right, you want to, you know, digitize this file this feature class within a file geo database. Here's the steps to do it. And you can walk your end user through it. And then analysis tools are the kind of thing that have replaced geoprocessing tools. So we'll cover all this. Here's how to get started with ArcGIS Pro. Let's get it going, yeah? So first thing I'm going to do, open up ArcGIS Pro. If there's any questions in the meantime, do let me know. Just get up the question tab, chat tab. Any questions, do let me know while this loads up. And if you do have questions, type them in to the Q&A or the chat. This session is being recorded and will be shared later. So here we go, right? So I've opened up, you can see top right, I'm signed in to my organization. TAS is not tied to versioning the geo database. It's more like if you have a set of analysis tools you're constantly using, you can set them up. So it's step 1, step 2. It's more for like beginners to go in, you standardize the workflow, not for versioning file geo database. Important distinction. From here, I have my project interface, right? So if you're fresh to ArcGIS Online, obviously, or ArcGIS Pro, you're not going to see anything in this recent projects. We have 5 different options for creating. So you'll see here, ArcGIS Desktop had ArcMap, ArcCatalog, ArcScene, right? And it's all split into this kind of new project, right? So I can choose to have a new map. I can choose to start off with a catalog project, or biggest difference, I can start without a template. What that means is that I start without a template. It lands me to ArcGIS Pro interface, right? And if I go across and I say insert, I can insert a new map, new layout. They're all in the same kind of location here. Interestingly enough, if I click on view, that's where my catalogs are hosted. And if I click on catalog pane, just to show you what gets created, database, default, right? Any toolboxes, default, styles, right? I have any styles that I've downloaded, such as Firefly, whatever it is. I have my folder connections and my locators, right? All on the right-hand side, all on this thing called catalog pane. I have no maps yet, but as I start to add them in, these are the first kind of 5 default things, right? We mentioned defaults. We have a default toolbox, default file geodatabase, right? And we have any styles that we've come across that you download, or by default, you have ArcGIS 2D, ArcGIS 3D. And it just means that any of the kind of symbology galleries that you were used to seeing in an ArcMap, they're now housed in a thing called styles. Yeah, and then I have any folder connections as well. First step when I do create an ArcGIS Pro project, take it from creating it from scratch. I'm going to go across to my catalog pane, right click, add folder connection. And I have one in here called webinar. Just going to highlight that here, press OK. And that's going to connect me to any GIS data set. So if you do have servers, central servers, you have the option just to go in folders straight away. And you can see here, I have something called Limerick shapefile, just to show you shapefiles are not gone. Well, there's a big emphasis on file geodatabases. Indeed, if you run analysis tools in ArcGIS Pro, the default is your default file geodatabase. It's going to throw that output into there, right? But just to show, we'll cover, shapefiles, we'll cover geocoding in CSVs and stuff like that, and then managing projects, printing out layouts. But the very first step is really just to establish your folder connections. Of course, if you have file geodatabase, you can go right click, database, add database, and navigate to whatever file geodatabase you have. Okay, so if you have any existing styles, the idea here is once I save this project, somebody else opens it up or I open it up, I don't need to make these folder connections anymore. Okay, so like we had with ArcMap, maybe things get broken over time, things get moved around. Cool enough, we still have that same issue here, right? Obviously, if data gets moved, it's not good, right? But from the very get-go, we have our folder connections here. Next thing, what I might want to do is insert, go to map. You see here, you have options, right? You can insert a map, global scene. Typically, rule of thumb, look, if you're working with any data and you're not sure it has geographic coordinate systems such as BIM files, 3D models, SketchUp files, start it off in a new local scene until you get it to where you want it to be. Or a global scene just opens up a 3D model of the globe. You're pretty sure your stuff is geo-referenced correctly. Cool enough, right? That's another kind of conversation when we get into like 3D support, BIM models and stuff like that. Very interesting conversations because a lot of BIM modelers use millimeters as their unit of measurements. We, of course, as GIS people, use coordinate systems, projected coordinate systems that are most commonly in meters. So you might have like 3D models as you start to experiment with it, going across the whole world because they're in meters as opposed to millimeters. Interesting conversations nonetheless. But if you have 3D data that is geo-referenced correctly, you can use global scenes. If not, use local scenes. But if you have anything else, 2D data, let's click on new map. From here, depending on how your organization is set up, your ArcGIS Online account, you'll notice this is the exact same extent that you get via your ArcGIS Online account. So whatever way it's been set up there, that's what you're going to see. Interestingly enough, I'm dealing with two data sets I want to show you today. So I have my Limerick shapefile, my Munster CSV. We'll get into what that means in a second. But if I open this up in File Explorer, you can see here I have Munster CSV. It's worth noting the File Explorer you can directly drag and drop into ArcGIS Online. Okay, so that's just going to add the CSV. From here, just to reiterate, we can go to View, Catalog pane, opens up all my project collateral. And you can see here, since I've added in this new map, it says Maps, and I have Map. Yeah, so I have multiple maps. When I go to add a layout now in a second, it'll add a layout as well. Yeah, but just to let you know, you have two options. You can go from File Explorer, drag it directly across, or we can navigate to our shapefile and drag it across. So this is building outlines, OpenStreetMap coming from Limerick City, right? So it's just a cut of building footprints. From here, I have historic buildings throughout Munster, which is a province in Ireland. If I have any CSV data, I can right-click it here. I can go to Display XY Data or Geocode Table. I'm going to go to Display XY Data. But much of what you want now, if you're coming from an ArcMap point of view, much of what you want is accomplished through a series of right clicks. Okay, so I right click, display XY data. And again, the annoying thing I'm going to say about ArcGIS Online, maybe, is that there's a lot of pop-ups when you click on things, so we just need to be aware of it. But we have our input table here. We have our output feature class. Good thing about it is that, if you have any longitude, latitude fields, X, Y coordinates, it'll pick it up automatically. You can, of course, the similar look and feel, pop-ups, get my fields correct, identify my coordinate system, WGS 1984 by default. I'm happy enough with that. I'll click OK. The only reason I do that is because, look how quickly, right? Okay, I got a warning. Fair enough. It's a real CSV. This ain't your software provider perfectly manicured data set webinar. This is a real live data set. Okay, I got a few errors, but if I right click, I can open up the attribute table here. And I can see there's 16,553 points within this CSV that I just located using latitude and longitude. But look how quickly it did that. So performance is a big thing. These are historic buildings. We won't get into it, but there's numerous things like, year it was created, the original building type. We have, XY coordinates, of course, and then we have information around the buildings. But how quickly it has geocoded that is pretty insane, right? Once I have my data loaded, right? So I have a point layer here, I have a polygon layer. I can go to map, and indeed, this is where you're going to be spending quite a bit of your time in ArcGIS Pro, where I have, my map tab open. By default, it has the Explore tool here, so I can zoom in and out using a mouse wheel. But you can see, like, even just the general performance of like zooming into areas. I'm zooming into an area that has my building footprints over it, right? My building outlines in a particular section, and it's going from there. Yeah. If I want as well, you can always change the base map. So it has, like OSI blueprint. Not a huge fan of it, but just to show you, like the performance, right? It's not instantaneous for certain things, but do bear in mind that, your base maps are now these things called vector tiles, so they're no longer raster. Okay, so you can see as this is building up, it's actually drawing it, right? For kind of sharper performance on your sharper visualization, I want to say, on your labeling and stuff like that. If I change this to, of course, we got the classics, imagery, hybrid, imagery. If you're in, Ireland, maybe you have Ordnance Survey Ireland. If you're in the UK, of course, you have Ordnance Survey GB. But the idea here is the same. Like, you can change your base map. You don't have to wait. You can even do it within like a webinar, right? Which is only like 60 minutes, right? And you can zoom in, get it. What's interesting about this is that anything that I've done, right? So I've added in a shapefile that was in WGS84 by default, right? Anything that I add in WGS84, I'm going to come in like, we'll talk a little bit about coordinate systems. Ireland kind of gets squished a little bit from top to bottom, right? But even just look at the rendering on that. The performance is a lot better in ArcPro than ArcMap. If I want to come in, all my map properties are in this map tab here. I can double left click, and this is where I set, general. I can say this is actually historic buildings of Munster. Once I right click that, my map on the right hand side changes. I can come back in here and I can say coordinate systems. And one of the interesting things about this is that, okay, I have a few favorites set up here, but let's say it was something else like Irish National Grid. There's also a search tool, which is very handy for finding out Irish National Grid, as opposed to going in and being like, oh, where was it? Projected coordinate systems, National Grid, Europe, right? We can filter all that out. We don't have to trawl through lists. We can go in and we can say the OSNI Irish National Grid or the actual Irish National Grid. You also have the ability to favorite things as well. So you can add favorites, which means that anytime you come back to it, double left click, coordinate systems, I could say this is actually EarNet 95, click done. And what's interesting about this is that, ITM straightens up Ireland, right, a little bit. It doesn't squish it at least, but it reprojects. There's a default transformation applied to my data sets the second I switch coordinate systems. Okay, so I no longer need to specify transformations. I can, of course, it's there as an option. I can specify my transformation, but automatically, if you choose it, it'll default to whatever one was. You have a few different options there, but at least, we can be assured that it's applying a projection, at least that my data is not out like I used to get in ArcMap. The other thing to note as well about ArcGIS Pro is the heavy ArcGIS Online connection. Albeit the top right has my username, my password for ArcGIS Online, because that's where my license is administered. But from here, you'll notice that there's a lot of kind of two-part buttons within ArcGIS Pro, and add data is a good example of it, right? So in ArcGIS Pro, depending on what you're doing, you have an icon button that'll get you places, but then you also have the text underneath that provides more drop-down menus. So I would say to you, as you're going through ArcGIS Pro, you have options. You're not limited to whatever's in the icon. Okay, so just one limitation of it is it's not entirely obvious unless you actually hover over it, right? But oftentimes the icon's going to lead you to one place, but if you click on the actual text itself, it'll lead you to another place. So that's where you add data from path, XY point, whatever it is. There's options there. If we click on the icon though, you can see here that you have options. You have like my content, my organization, my groups. This is all coming from your portal. Whether that is indeed ArcGIS, I know I'm using ArcGIS Online because it's the most common one, but ArcGIS Enterprise, right? The biggest marketing mishap Esri Inc. ever did was not calling ArcGIS Enterprise ArcGIS Offline. And then you have ArcGIS Offline, ArcGIS Online, and it'd be just nice, simple, put in his bucket, If you want us to host all your content, it's ArcGIS Online. If you want to host it yourself on your own servers, that's called ArcGIS Offline, because essentially Portal is an offline version of ArcGIS Online. But we have our options. Portal, I can add in things from Living Atlas. I can type in, of course, Living Atlas is the curated, authoritative data catalog, but it's global. So I mean, might need to preface it and say, oh, look, I want to add in Ireland county boundaries. And I can do that here as well. Yeah, so you can add in anything from Living Atlas to performance. Look, it depends on your internet speed, but by and large, the performance is quite quick. Yeah, that I have my county boundaries loaded in, and that's just coming from Living Atlas. So it is possible within your ArcGIS Pro project, multiple data sources like we had in ArcMap, but the power of actually adding in stuff from Living Atlas, stuff from ArcGIS Online, data sets that your colleagues might be working on as well. Yeah. The other option, just to note, like select by locations, right? They're all in here. Okay, so I can, select. I still have my lassos. I still have my rectangles. I also have a more performant select by location. So what I mean by that is that it is possible to select multiple different layers within your map. We can set up the relationship, intersect, whatever it is, and then we can select the selecting features. Okay, so I can say, identify for me all the building footprints. I know it's only in a small area. I'm sure you take my point that we can go in and we can say, hey, identify all the ones that intersect these county boundaries. Of course, they're all going to come back, but the idea here is that we have a more streamlined workflow for select by location. Very important if you're working in public sector, if you have any, freedom of information requests come in, or parliamentary questions, political questions, or, anything at all. If you're working in private sector, your project manager said, hey, how many houses did we connect this week? Whatever it is, if you need key numbers, select by location is a lot more performant. Of course, if we need to apply any definition queries as well, it's a lot more performant. That we come in, we just go in, double left click on the actual layer itself, click on Ireland county boundaries, expand it, double left click, or optionally right click, go to properties, definition queries are your new query builders. I can say create a new definition query. In this case, what I might want to do is say maybe like, province equals Munster, just because I'm showing all the historic buildings in Munster, but the idea remains the same. I have my operator, and it is very easy to build these definition queries, build, select by location. So that's a very important workflow that you might want to keep in your back pocket for ArcGIS Pro, is just getting information, getting answers based on your geographic information. And really, that is it for map, like measure, locate, infographics. Cool enough, you know what I mean? Where we can go in and we can just say, oh, look, I want to click on an area. Maybe I want to click on, County Clare. And it's going to return to me an infographic that wasn't available in ArcMap, Now, the problem is this takes a little while to load, but it does load basic infographics. If you're familiar with business analyst, community analyst in ArcGIS Online, you'd be familiar with this, but the idea remains the same. We click on a point, we click on a county boundary, whatever it is. I would say it's more of a nice to have than an actual functioning piece, but if you do need to pull out key demographics, you can. It'll put it into a nice little infographic for you. Probably not working well, and that's fine, because it is one thing to bear in mind about ArcGIS Pro in general. While there's a lot of tools, not every tool is gonna be happy to play with. Yeah. So we have infographics. Hopefully it'll load now, but the idea here is that you go in, select a point on a map, you get information around it. You can change your infographics as well. But it is one thing to note, there's a lot of nice to have tools within Pro. Didn't exist in ArcMap. Really depends on your workflow, like, obviously if you're a national authority on something, you're not going to want to use Esri infographics. You're probably going to want to use your own data, but options, options when it does come to it. The other thing about this as well is that if I have multiple different maps, right, I can insert a new map here, and voila, it goes up into my tabbed experience. So I have historic buildings of Munster. Maybe I want one, that's called, go into properties here. Maybe I want something that's called, historic buildings of Ulster, of Connacht, whatever the province is. I'm sure you take my point. We have the ability to add in multiple different maps. We also have the option for a lot more layout flexibility. So we have a tree, portrait, landscape, whatever it is. We also have options, though, where you can say import layout. They do have a few different options if you want to start off from an actual template. So if I select, like minimal A3 landscape, for instance, it's just going to pop it up. But you can see here, as I start to progress on, add things to my Pro project, it comes up here on the right-hand side. It comes in layouts. Perfect. Yeah. What I can do then is I can activate my map frame, right? Whatever it is. It also adds in a map, okay? So any layouts that I do from the template, not necessary. If I go in, new layout, add in maybe an A4 landscape, it comes up as blank. And I can specify the map frame. It's only if you're using templates. But look at all the different options that I have available. I have the ones from historic buildings of Munster, the defaulter extent, or the extent that the base map's in right now. I have my light gray base, which is the template. I just added the map to show you can have more than one map. And you can, go from here, choose it, draw it, and much of the layout tools available to you in ArcMap are roughly the same anyways, based on, what we had in ArcMap. All really the same. They're just hidden in the top little tab here, so your north arrow, again, the only thing I would say if you are configuring layouts, there's the north arrow itself, the icon, and you just go here, create a north arrow by default, or there's the text that you click on, and that's where you get all your different options. Same for scale bar, same for legend, right? Same for, you know, there are a thing called charts now as well that you can integrate to ArcGIS Pro. But, you know, these are the express workflows that we're coming up with. Yeah. Also quite interesting, dynamic text as well, that you get a lot more out of the box options, a lot more functionality available to you in ArcGIS Pro. So for instance, you can have like current time, data exported, name, service layer credits, right? Whatever it is, project folder locations. There's a lot more out of the box options for you in layouts. Yeah. When we come to dynamic text, you have the options to draw shapes, right? Arrows, whatever it is. If you want to annotate things, if you want to go back to it. But, you know, I'm sure you take my point that that's very kind of organization specific. Much of the tools are the exact same. The other thing to bear in mind is that when we do have our kind of layouts set up, they appear on the right-hand side, perfect. You can start to close them down where you're only left, you know, with whatever you're dealing with. And then if you have, you know, oh yeah, that's connected to map. The only thing I would say is that we have this layout, minimal A tree landscape. It's connected to this map. So you might just want to be aware of kind of naming conventions to say like, you know, right click this, click rename and say this is minimal A tree landscape map, you know, or whatever it is. Just be aware that while there are plurals now supported within ArcGIS Pro, multiple maps, multiple layouts, I just need to be aware of a naming convention, you know, because if we're using templates, just want to be making sure that, you know, there's no obvious way to find out that this is actually linked to this without a naming convention. The other two things, just to finish off our session, are the analysis tools. So like we had in ArcMap, we kind of had these like gentle suggestions, you know, on the kind of most commonly used analysis tools. Analysis tools are the new geoprocessing tools. And you can see here, we have, you know, like these kind of user-friendly little icons that I can say, oh, look, you know, I have summarize within, whatever it is. If I wanted to go in, right, and take, you know, just to give you a quick kind of workflow for analysis, right? So if I had, you know, my my county boundary, we'll do building footprints, right? Just to show you. So if I have my building footprints and I have my points, I can go in and I can say summarize within. It's in the toolbox, but you can see here where the ribbon interface becomes a little more confusing that I have to click on summarize within. Up pops a specific analysis tool for summarize within. The idea though is that I have my input polygons is called limerick, my input summary features called Munster XY table to point, my output feature class, note that it is going to your default file geodatabase. I have my output name, summary fields if I want to put it in, group fields. Of course, we have the same inputs as we did before in geoprocessing tools. Great thing about ArcGIS Pro is that if I don't get my analysis tool correct the first time, I can always redo it. Okay, so there's no longer a case of, you know, you put a buffer on something and it's like 5 kilometers, say, and then I say, I need to go back and add 10-kilometer buffers. You can rerun analysis tools on the same features. Okay, so even if it outputs something, in this case, it's output limerick, summarize within, I open it up. I get this information. I get the exact same record count, 2,503. And I say, oh, nice one, you know, and then it counts how many historic buildings intersect the building boundary. If I say, do you know what? I didn't want to keep all input polygons, just uncheck it, run it again, and it just leads to a more streamlined workflow for ArcGIS Pro. And it's going to intersect the features, and then it's only going to return the ones that have intersecting points, right? And you can see how quickly these analysis tools are running. Okay, I'm running a machine that has like 1 terabyte SSD, 32 gigs of RAM. fine. But, I'm sure you take my point. It's a lot more performant. I didn't have to get any coffee breaks, any tea breaks for this webinar to work, and it spat out, an analysis output. Wasn't happy with it. That's fine. I can just go back on it and go again. All your tools. If I click on tools, you can favorite tools, of course, like we could with ArcMap, but they're all located in the toolbox. One thing I really like to do is just find tools, so as you get used to it, you're like, oh yeah, there's a really handy Excel, but I can't remember the exact name of the tool, and just go table to Excel, and there's a search function within it. Bear in mind, any padlocks means I don't have access to it. Any coin symbol, it just means that it uses credits as per your ArcGIS Online account. So just be aware of that as we go through. And the final thing I just want to leave you with, of course, editing tools. There's tons more of them, but the process is the same. Trace tool is still there. You'll notice that as you get to grips with ArcGIS Pro, a lot of the stuff is just under these little, fancy user-friendly icons now. But if I did want to go in and say, hey, I can share this, you can share projects. Okay, so you can share central projects to ArcGIS Online. We can share the actual map itself. We can share web maps, web layers. You can export this as a PDF, whatever it is that you want to do. We have those options. Also worth noting that you can publish feature layers directly via ArcGIS Pro. Right-click the right feature layer, go sharing, share as web layer, and go from there. Yeah, but that is a rough and ready overview of ArcGIS Online. Of course, the things we didn't cover are the things that you could figure out in 10 seconds of opening up ArcGIS Pro. Is just a more kind of, how to get started with it. What can you do? We covered our kind of 3 base points, adding data to it, adding our web maps, adding our layouts as well. What is, like the things you could figure out within 3 seconds is, oh, I have a brown point here. Just double left click it, up pops my gallery. I want it to be red points. Or actually, my feature layer just popped up. Go here, experiment around with this, but like this is very user friendly, I think, where I have like my unique values, go from there. But again, this is a very similar look and feel. If you're experienced with ArcMap, you're experienced with change in symbology, you're experienced with labeling. But hopefully that has been of value to you. Any questions, put them in the chat. Other than that, though, hopefully it's been helpful to you. That is your Express workflows getting started with ArcGIS Pro, and hopefully you found it useful. This is recorded. It will go out on YouTube and LinkedIn later today. But if you are interested, you can feel free, reach out to me at adam@gis-express.com. And yeah, look, that is it. If you have any questions, let's stick around.